Okay, hi, welcome everybody. Yeah, great that I see some names and people are also coming in. So I would like to wish you all a really warm welcome in this online event, which is part of Sijben's residency fellowship, as we like to call it, because it's really a longer time period that Sijben spent working on this project. That consisted of the making and editing of a film that was screened here in May, and then also consisted of a three series workshops that we did here at the chapel here in Hoorn. And we really enjoyed that process a lot. I think also as a team we learned a lot. And that's why I'm really glad that we could go even a little bit deeper with this conversation that we will have today after the screening of Sijben's film, A Little Bit Like the Soul. And to have that conversation after the film, Sijben invited Simon from Saarloos, which we're super excited to have with us. And yeah, I'm just really curious also and excited about the things that we will learn today on the topics that you have been talking about and can go talking about more. Which I also feel a little bit privileged to see and this kind of maybe starting relationship of friendship, of academic knowledge interchange between the two of you. So it's really nice that you want to share that also with us as an institution and us as a public. So without further ado, I would really like to introduce Sijben and Simon. Maybe you can just say a quick hi, and then we will start the screening.
Hey, thank you so much for hosting Hotel Maria Kapel. This is cool. Thanks.
Nice.
Oh. Yeah, hi. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Sijben, and Hotel Maria Kapel. Yeah.
And to see so many familiar faces on the sidebar. That's great. So happy to have you all here.
Yeah, super excited. Okay, let's start with the screening of the beautiful film, and then we let our thoughts and emotions run and share them afterwards. Wow, thank you again, Sijben, for making this film, and it has been a while now that the sounds of this film used to come from the cinema down here, and I really missed the film actually, and also the object was present in the cinema space together with the audience while we were screening the film for a few weeks after the opening in May. And it really took me back to that time when we had many conversations and around the object, with the object, and the film that really filled the whole chapel. Yeah, so thank you again for making this artwork. And I really am glad that many people also joined to see it. And I don't want to talk too much, to be honest. I just want to again say welcome and leave the discussion to you. Maybe just a quick introduction about for the people that don't know the speakers of this conversation tonight, or morning, depending on where you are. Simon is joining us from San Francisco, is that right?
Berkeley, yeah, San Francisco.
Yeah. Maybe you can introduce yourself really briefly for the people that might not know you.
Yeah, hi everybody. I am Simon van Saarloos, indeed, and I am a writer. And yes, I'm currently in California. Yeah, and I think more of an introduction will come through the conversation. Yeah, thank you.
And Sijben, just to give a short word to you as well.
Yes, Sijben Rosa, nice to meet you. So happy to see all these names appear here. Many familiar ones. I'm an artist who works in sculpture and performance and the overlap between those two. And now also a filmmaker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Sijben made this film during the long fellowship residency at the HMK program of this year. So we were very happy to have you. And yeah, I was just wondering, the title of the film, a little bit like the soul. Maybe you can start by explaining a little bit about where that sentence came from and how that evoked some thoughts and that made the artwork born.
A little bit about a little bit like the soul. Um, the title came about when I made a work called Pocket Work back in 2014 already. I had made small sculptures that were hidden in the pocket of the staff members or the room, the people attending the room in the museum where it was exhibited. And in the exhibition, you would only see a poster that simply said, if you would like to see the third work of this exhibition, ask the staff members because they carry it in their pocket. So there was always somebody present who had my work in their pocket, literally. And also they would carry it with them outside of the exhibition. So if you would meet them later in the gym or in the supermarket, you could ask them about it too. They would just have it on them all the time for the entire duration of the exhibition. And one of the people who carried this object was the curator of the show, Hans-Jürgen Hoffmann. And in an interview that I did with him later, asking him about his experiences, he mentioned how the work made him think about very banal questions about art, about, for example, where the art is located. So he said the art is not in the object, it's not in the sculpture. If you would chop it up, you wouldn't find it in there. And then he said the sentence, in that sense, it is a little bit like the soul. So he compared how art is connected to physical objects, to how our soul is connected to us, or located in or around us. And I guess what he was trying to imply is how both a soul, if such thing exists, and art, if such thing exists, are really something that only exist in relation to others, or by us applying this or attaching this to objects. Yeah. I thought you might have some thoughts on that, Simon, to hook on to.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I might have a bit of a delayed response, and it's not because it's morning. I think it's because of the film and how, in some sense, it gives me a kind of slowing down.
I think
but
with your normal tempo of speaking, a bit of slowing down is no problem.
yeah, exactly. But I think like maybe just like I just kind of want to plot for you. Maybe people want to join me who are in the audience. Kind of like yeah, response also to like seeing the film again and like in this gathering. Yeah, so I see some like emoji hands.
That's cute. Stop it.
It's funny because it's really nice to see it together with people, even though I could not see anybody seeing it. I could still feel the presence of other people. And maybe also to say that there will be space also for questions from you So from you being the audience, and therefore participants in the conversation, we will also invite those in a little bit. And I just want you to know that, and it would be great to hear your questions. And yeah, Sijben, thank you so much for asking me to join this conversation, because it's been really fun and interesting to think with you already. We had some conversations before this, and for me, the work kind of made me revisit questions around living with objects, if we can say it like that. A kind of, you've talked about this in conversations with philosopher Simon van der Wilde, what it means to show like this kind of like intimacy or care, what it means to care for objects. So for me, that felt, a lot of the things felt like revisits to questions that came up for me earlier. For example, in a work that I created for a theater company called Ulrike Kwade, and they asked me to write a text for an actor who was in relationship with a sex doll. And
it's called the Foetushemel. People should really go see it.
No, this is actually, thank you for pitching that. But this was actually an older work, and this was called Maniacs, which was a very judgmental title of somebody, like this was about a relationship between a man or a person who fell in love with a sex doll. And the sex doll was like one of those, the ones that are made like really well made. They're very heavy, they're silicone heavy. They have like parts of their body, I was almost gonna signal which parts, but that you can take out and wash, right? They're made to be able to have sex with, so to say. And this actor lived with that doll throughout the sequence of the rehearsals and had to care for her as well. Or had to, right? Like this is the funny thing, is that it immediately becomes this kind of like hesitant relationship where it's like, oh, he had to take care of her.
As if it's a burden, you mean?
Yeah, as if it's a burden. And so I think in some sense, for me, writing the text was really about what it means to, like, what kind of space opens up to project your love on something that doesn't speak back, right? Or that in our human language cannot give consent, for example. And the sort of space of giving that suddenly becomes exemplified because the object can only sort of absorb, potentially, right? It's like this one directional view of the object that I thought was really interesting in that case. I think for Maniacs, one of the things I learned was that the sex doll was traveling throughout Europe for the theater show, and they bought her a ticket to get to Norway, but Norwegian Air didn't allow for her to sit on the plane. And the reason was because if in case of emergency, the flight attendants are trained to attend to people, and they might confuse the sex doll, the doll, for a person.
Oh
and
my
then
God.
injure their life for an object, right? And I thought it was really interesting that this idea of safety gave her actually like a passport of humanity.
And then also prohibited her to fly, actually, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm wondering for you in terms of that, right? Like living with the object. So the funny thing too is that if I say object, then everybody, I think, who has seen the film knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Which is a weird distribution of attention in some sense too, because there's so many objects in the film, but there's one object that continues to come back, right? Like there's this moment where somebody is playing a video game and they're turning their back to the object on the pool table.
Yeah.
And it's that gut-wrenching feeling of like, oh, you're turning your back. Like, but
Yeah.
no, they're actually like facing another object.
Yeah.
And maybe the object love
And
to pool table. Yeah.
yeah, and in the plane there might have been all kinds of other objects as well, right? But because this doll specifically looked too much like us, she was somehow a threat,
Yeah.
and therefore not allowed. Because I did actually make a sculpture once that had exactly the shape of hand luggage in an average airline regulation, let's say. Yeah, to also think of like, could I then like take an artwork as long as it fits those regulations in the airplane, and how is then my luggage different from other people's luggage? And there somehow, yeah, so also this work being art sometimes also gave it some permissions actually. So in the way that the doll maybe, I don't know, it's not an artwork, maybe it's not comparable, but for example, when I was on my way to the airport and still a little nervous to see if I would be able to pass customs with a solid wooden block, basically. I remember the taxi driver, who was a bit high, told me, I just tell them it's art, they will ask no further questions. So yeah, I guess by me actively attributing, putting the soul into this work, let's say, attributing art to this object, it somehow, yeah, it gave the object more freedom to move. So maybe that's what you should have done with the doll. Just say it's art.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes me wonder. I mean, that's the one thing that immediately came up for me when you spoke about this curator, right? Saying like it's a little bit like the soul. That I was realizing like, okay, so on the one hand, the object gets a kind of, whether that's the pocket object that the curator was speaking about, or this object, right, like named art passing through customs. It's like the object gets a kind of value attributed to it by naming it like art, a sex doll, or something like the soul. But I was like especially interested in like how, on the one hand, there's like this in the film, what seems to happen is that there's this shift from the cold object, right? How object is perceived as something cold, as something that does not give back, to something as part of the community. So there is a way in which like the object becomes less separable, less distinguished from people. But then at the same time, people, people in this case. But then at the same time, like the attribution of the word soul still keeps intact in some sense this hierarchy of like, okay, something has to have a soul, or has at least to have the projection of having a soul,
yeah,
in order for it to be of value or to be seen as animate.
yeah. Yeah, same for art, I guess. Because that was sometimes also the thing while filming. Of course, we were in practical situations sometimes where people would ask what this object is. And then I guess we called it a sculpture, but I'm not that sure if the object is actually a sculpture, because that almost implies that that's an artwork in itself, right? Where I felt like it's also not just a prop. It's not just a part that that only within the film, and the film is the artwork. Yeah. So it's somewhere in between, I guess. Somewhere in between a prop and a sculpture. Maybe something in between a relic and a requisite. I find it always kind of striking that those two words are pretty close together. So a relic of a moment, and also a requisite. Is that the right word? Requisite in English? A prop, I guess you would translate it in English. Yeah. I thought maybe so before talking, you sent me some link to an article in Freeze magazine where I took this sentence from it that I thought was interesting. I'll read it to you. Given the overexposure of trans bodies to fetishizing looks, couldn't an abstraction offer a method of representing, complicating, dispersing, and concealing trans embodiments all at once? I was wondering if you could maybe help me to reflect a bit on how, like, what the role of this of abstraction could play in a work like this, because we were comparing this. I think it's kind of interesting that we were comparing this doll that has like a very clearly imitating a human shape, and then what else is happening when we're talking about such an abstract work object. Okay, that's my doorbell. Object, and also the film is in a way also quite abstract, right? Compared to such a figurative situation, sculpture like the doll.
Yeah. I think in some sense, like what it made me think of just now when you said it like that, the way in which it would make so much sense in some sense. It would make so much sense that to like not to put queer as, not to like focus on queer, especially since that article is in some sense about trans, right? But like not to focus on queer as sexuality, but there is something interesting that I brought in, that like the doll for maniacs, that is like this straight relationship where there's like a figuration, like, right, of a woman. And then also like the representation of what that woman exists of is like these movable parts that can be cleaned and taken out. And so there's something deeply figurative potentially about a straight expectation of an object versus, right, like if we take the literal sort of root of the word queer to be like twist, like even if you would just imagine the sex doll twisting, like she would already become kind of like an abstraction in some sense, or she would just look like the evil Barbie in the Barbie film. I don't know about that. And that there's something like, it brings me in some sense to the work of Harry Dodge, visual sculpture, visual artist, sculpture maker, who has created a series called Works of Love. And I think the proposition in that series of work is really this question of like, okay, but actually I do believe it is possible to be in love with objects and objects to be in love with me. And I don't see that as a problem, because working with something, and I'm saying I sort of from the artist perspective right now, but like working with objects is a form of love and caring with and for. Like, why would that be a differentiation? And also like the titillation that one might have working with these objects, right? Like the attraction to it as well. And like, how does that, the attraction to objects, how can that be separated in some sense, or does it need to be separated? But like, if the love for objects is consumed in some sense by capitalists' intention of like, okay, every time you like there's like a differentiation, I guess, in some sense between owning an object and living with an object. And that is something that I think, and I know there's people in the audience who are thinking with this as well, comes a lot of what we maybe theorize around that comes from disability life, and like a disabled relationship to, or a cripped relationship to objects, where the objects are not hindrances to access, right? Or objects are not a weakening of one's ability, but are instead a full-on extension of being able to live. And so that also contributes to highlighting an inseparability between objects and person. I think maybe just to bring it totally back to your question about abstraction, because I think we could talk about that for a lot longer. But I want to hear from you maybe how that article specifically, which is, for those who don't know, it's like an article by Jack Halberstam, and it is indeed about this, like the way in which it's about visual culture, right? So it's about the way in which trans artists in this current moment are called to portray trans bodies, so trans people.
Yeah.
Specifically, like signatures of trans bodies, right? So like scars, or injecting oneself, or even like the 9 months on T voice videos. And this desire for abstraction is sort of being asked, like, what could that mean? What could trans abstraction?
Yeah.
And I know that, like, in some of the conversations that I heard you have about this film, there was a lot of focus on who is in the film. So, for example, you explicitly said, like, I wanted to work with queer performers.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something there for you to say in relationship to, like, yeah, the centralization of bodies, either in the reception of the film or in actually also your own making of the film.
Yeah. Yeah, I was immediately very I was very enthusiastic about this article, especially when I first started reading it, because I think it somehow revealed something for me. I mean, abstraction has always been something that has been present in my work for, like, since the very beginning, I guess, because the whole ambiguity that comes with it allows me to play with object a lot more. Like for example, in the beginning of my practice, I was very busy with how context changes our perception of objects, and of course, the more ambiguous an object is, the more it would enable me to have it transform in different contexts. But especially in the moment that I started making this film, I think it was quite a personal. Oh, damn! I'm sorry about this doorbell. I'll take the batteries out in a sec. Especially in the beginning of this process, I wasn't so sure exactly why this queerness or queering care relationships was fascinating me so much, and actually through the whole process of preparing and filming and also editing the film, that started to more and more intertwine with my own trajectory of finding out these things in my own life. But I'm not so interested in exhibiting that. So I guess abstraction was also a way for me to not just to conceal or to hide or something, but also to play with it, to open up these subjects more. And I somehow feel like there is some sort of relationship between queerness or queering in general and abstracting things, that in the sense that they both somehow create space for doing things different, seeing things different, for experimenting, for and I was excited that this article seemed to open up these topics. But then what was almost a bit of a disappointment is that somehow I was really hoping for some clues there, and the article doesn't really give that. So I mean, I don't know, maybe that's for something for myself to find out. But I would be very interested to hear your thoughts on that as well, whether you see some some more relationships there.
Yeah, I'm very suspicious and paranoid, which I think in some sense the reason that I feel uncomfortable with the way in which queer and or trans becomes figurative, right? Not just in art, but also like as a sort of like, oh, this is a description of people, is because I think that this is where my suspicion comes in, right? I think like everything that is projected onto people is a form of wanting to contain, because then it only refers to certain people, right? So okay, if queerness is a description of sexuality that is of and belongs to people, then there's a kind of containment of what queerness can do.
Yeah.
And so for me, what I mean, and because people haven't read that article, I presume, and it's not even that interesting of an article, and this is not to take the article down, but it is like, it's like, oh, it gives that little spark of thought.
Yeah. Basically, everybody has read it already by hearing us say these things.
And I think like what I'm interested in, so
I think it was interesting what you said before, not in this conversation, but our previous one. I think related to what you just said, you also said something about with people wanting to contain queerness to maybe almost make it less threatening. And then we were talking about things possibly being a phase, and then you were like, yeah, who cares if it's a phase? I'm curious to the next phase. I like that approach.
Yeah, it's funny, good. It's this idea, like, so there's a question of temporality, right? Like if it's a phase, then supposedly it's not real, because things like the soul have to be unchangeable, and they have to like be somehow eternal in order for them to mean something in like a kind of like Northwestern idea of value, right? So they have to be static in some way, and so the response to that is like, no, actually it could be a phase. It could last one day and it would still be of value.
Yeah.
And so the object in some sense, and this just comes up for me right now, but like the object in some sense, what if the object does represent queerness?
Yeah.
Not in an internal sense or in a completely totalizing or dominant sense, but what if the object signals queerness simply in its passing? So when the object touches you, you become queer, whatever the
Wow.
and when it has left you, it might mean something else is touching you. And suddenly that brings up for me also like the work of Gloria Becker, who is a Afro-Surinamese Dutch anthropologist, and who has written this participatory study called The Politics of Passion, in which she talks about Mati work in Suriname. And there's the Mati work relates to Winti spirituality, where, right, a spirit, by lack of a better word, can come and visit you and can go again. And that spirit might want to lay down with women. So if you consider yourself a woman and the spirit of that wants to lay down with women comes and visits you, that in that sense is your sexuality in that moment. But it is not about being lesbian. Maybe that is also a question for you then about process, right? What for you in living with the object, while, like you said, they're not to like personalize it into your like own exploration story, right? Which I think often happens.
Yeah.
Which to me, there was also something that you said when we previously talked, is like this kind of idea of that you went to Lisbon. Like, what if you would just say like, oh, I went to Lisbon and there I became queer and genderqueer, etc. because there were just really convincing people.
Yeah.
The same as the object passing by, it's fine to be contaged.
Yeah.
As opposed to like finally finding yourself.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how that process, not as in like how did that process as like a kind of emotional, but like how did the living with the object and the performers move that kind of queerness with you then also?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I think I will answer that from the perspective of the object already existing before it existed. So sometimes I'm thinking about like when does an artwork actually come into being? Is it when I do the final strike of paint, or is it when I bought the material, or is it maybe when I like pictured the object in my mind for the first time? So I kind of like to, and also afterwards, I kind of like to think of this artwork almost as an entire lifespan of something, and I'm never really sure when exactly that starts and ends. So I think when I first started writing for this proposal, that's like a long time ago. That's, I guess, like almost 2.5 years ago. I knew that I wanted to explore more what would happen to this object when people would really care for it for a long time, and I guess I wanted to think about parenting also in a different way. I felt a bit like there was such a strong push in society to like for care to take exactly that shape in your life, and I wanted to see if I could replace that by caring for materials and maybe kind of expanding our idea of care towards more than just humans, or maybe even more than just the living world. And then when I was writing about it, I was writing with Arda van Tichelen, with a curator and fundraiser, and Arda identifies as queer. So Arda asked me at some point, do these performers have to be queer? Is that what you're trying to say? Are you trying to talk about different forms of family? And then I was like, well, I don't know, maybe. Can I? I don't know. I was not identifying as queer myself at that moment, so I didn't really feel the space to talk about it in that sense. And then I guess when being in contact with this group, and we talked previously about like how being in such a queer environment that in the program that I was following in Lisbon, how it can both maybe how both can be true, that it reveals something that has been inside of you always, but that it can also just be that you get infected. and I guess the same happened to the plan of this film, that it all started to make more sense together. And then once I had determined who the performers would be for the film, I asked them to write things about to write me letters about moments that they felt were full of care within their life. previously, and also the kind of dreams that they would have about the role that care could play in their lives in the future. And those actually became those became the starting points for me to write the scenes, basically, or to set the scenes for how to film them. I've also been experimenting with text and having them read out these things or interview them. And in the end, I decided to take all of that away because there we come back to this whole becoming way too literal. And I think all of these things were visible in the film without them explaining these things. Yeah. I lost track of what your question was again. Was this an answer to what you asked me?
Yeah, it was like about the moving with queerness in relationship to like, or like the process of like excavating your own queerness, or not excavating it, but being infected by.
Yeah.
But now that you mention like conversation and text, like I think there's one moment of text in the film that I am not personally able to understand because it's not a language that I speak, but I do wonder, this is also something that I was thinking, asking you, is like, how does the work of sound, how does the sound work for you in relationship to narrative? Because like there's these moments, you know, for example, there's a moment where it's like, it seems like pesto or something, or like some like green substance that is being like rubbed very gently, or what I perceive on, you know, and then the hands are joining, etc. And there is a moment of like, at that moment I was like, oh, there's almost suspense in how the music works, and then suspense gives a kind of narrative to some, like there's some expectation that is built through the use of sound. And I'm curious like how you're thinking about narrative in relationship to sound. Yeah.
In this film specifically, you
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So there's two people that have been working on the sound on this film with me. One is my brother, who's the only person who's not identifying as queer, who took part in the making of this film. And I thought it was really funny that he somehow wanted to make the sound pretty urban or pretty like city-like. Then when I questioned him more about this, there turned out to be some assumptions about queerness and being a very urban thing. So I said, no, that's not what we're gonna do. Like this is something. Listen, this is something very natural. Yeah, that was a funny conversation. So in terms of narrative, I thought that was a striking moment. The other person who was who made the music for this film is called Willem Witz, and I think especially this avocado moment somehow stirred up a lot of discussion with everybody, also with the editor and with Willem as well. We've been working on it very much because we somehow wanted to create some kind of moment of intimacy there without it becoming necessarily just a very sexual, in a way, somehow flat. And it's also one of the moments in which the object actually has a sound itself. So Willem has been integrating every here and there, very subtly, a sound that seems to suggest that it comes from the object itself, as if it's kind of responding to what's happening to it. Gosh, can I say something more about sound and narrative? I think when we started, like this first scenes of the hands, kind of the hands are, I asked them to kind of outline the object or their memory of the object without the object being there in this first scene. That seems to be almost like a dance of the hands. Not very literal, not like, ooh, I'm touching it here, but almost something in between doing that and kind of expressing the experience of touching the object. And there, we wanted to be somehow melancholic without it becoming dramatic. So it was, I guess, what I'm often doing I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but I'm going to say it anyways. I guess what I'm often doing within sculpture, I'm kind of avoiding all kinds of associations that are too clear or too literal. And therefore, if I'm talking about abstracting objects or abstraction, it's more about laveren. How do you say laveren in English? Like swimming around or in between all kinds of interpretations or associations, more than like trying to be completely outside of it. I'm still trying to kind of flirt with possible interpretations, possible applications and uses also, without ever giving you an answer of yes, this is what it is or that's what it is. And I guess this is also something that we were trying to do with the music in some moments, that it would give you that it's not nothing, that it's not abstraction in the sense of that it's not giving you any clues, but that it's that it's open enough, that it is giving you hints, that it is giving you entrances or pushing you in directions, but never saying yes, this is it, fixing you there, this is what you have to think about this. This is how you should interpret this. And I guess that's the same kind of ambiguity that we often have been looking for in the music as well. I'm looking, is Willem here? Can we just ask him? No, he's not. Yeah.
And how do you navigate testing that wavering or swimming? Because what I hear is also that you're not trying to oppose a certain normative meaning by doing the opposite necessarily, right? So like it's not like, so you say it's some sort of melancholic but not sentimental. Like it's like this kind of like, so it's a very small movement between like markers of meaning that you feel exist. Like how do you just take yourself as a measure of what you think something means, or is that something that you do in process with, of course, with your sound makers, but like, do you test that with an audience, for example?
Yeah. Within the making, I mean, I've showed it. Of course, I show it to different people, people that know my work or that I trust and that I just want to reflect back to me what it is that they see. Sometimes to smaller test audiences, a much earlier cut. But some things are cliches, are obvious what they mean, right? And I guess like sometimes I think also the practice of getting more skilled in my practice is not just about like material skills or knowing how an editing program works or something, but maybe becoming more and more skilled in being able to guess what an audience will see. And obviously I might be wrong. So I feel like this prediction or this or like looking at my own work with a certain distance as if I'm looking through the eyes of an audience is becoming easier, I think, over time. And just responding to what you said with like not trying to necessarily do the opposite, but more maybe to kind of stretch possibilities, to open up different ways. Yeah.
I think it's interesting, something that you just said brought me back to the before we also invite questions in. So if you are thinking about formulating one, just letting you know that we will get to your questions.
We're almost there. We're almost getting to the questions, so better get ready.
Not with sound, but by I think something that you just said, there was like, so brought me back to the dissatisfaction that you felt about reading that Jack Halberstam article about figurative art, or like the force for like representational art, right? Like I think this is another thing, is that it's like figurative, but it's representational, and the expectation that representation can happen, which I think also has components of race that we might have to talk about. But there was something else before maybe returning to that, right? There's something else that I thought about when you said it, when you said I might be wrong, which you've been saying all along, just by wearing that t-shirt.
By wearing a disclaimer.
And it's something about, yeah, so I was thinking about the trans experience. Like, so this is not to say, but like I was saying, okay, I'm very suspicious and then paranoid, which I think is also, for me in this current moment at least, okay, not to make it too personal, right, as we're trying to steer away from that, but like, I think there's this question of abstraction that's like hidden in it, is that the trans experience in some sense is this obsession with like, do they see a boy or a girl? When you're in a, like, especially medically transitioning, right? Like there's this kind of like slippery slope phase, at least, that hopefully will always be different phases. Where it's like, oh, do they see? Suddenly you're thinking, and this is my experience, I'm saying but in my experience, my biggest feeling of grief in relationship to transitioning is that in this current moment, I feel my thinking has become so much more static and stalled than ever before, because I always thought about transitioning within a gender fluid context. But because of being read all the time and also becoming obsessed with it in some sense, because of sort of leaping into the idea of transitioning, just by virtue of like taking steps, medical steps for transitioning, for example, right? Or socially transitioning. I have never thought so much about, like, this is the thing, right? I've never thought so much about this like gender measuring as in this current moment, in some sense. I still do not believe in boy or girl, and still I'm constantly reading that that question to be present. And it's something that sorry.
As if like the more ambiguous you become, the more you're confronted with the existing categories in society or something. Is that what you mean? Do I understand you right?
Yeah, and like the explicit engagement with the ambiguity makes that you're constantly, so I'm thinking about you doing the swerving move, makes that you're constantly between sort of the markers or the signifiers of the norm that I always already deemed present, right? But suddenly there's this like constant relationship to it, precisely because not just like wavering between it in language, but also in body. And when you said, I think I might be wrong, I think this is for me, I don't know what I'm saying, except for that I think that this is for me what I would want to remember or feel in that kind of like paranoid trans experience, is that maybe it is not all the time about gender. Maybe the feeling of being read, right, which is obvious, like it's so obvious because it's everywhere in language. It's like being called something constantly.
Yeah.
There's constantly a gender marking, even in a language of English in this case, right, where the words themselves do not change because of gender. It's just the marking of pronouns, or by being ma'amed or mistered or whatever. And for me, transitioning is not to become something right, but is something, is this search for like, I might be wrong. And it feels continuously harder to live in like a communal relationship to other people as maybe we are wrong.
Yeah.
Because of trans representation.
Yeah.
Because people do know what trans. So there's like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it is actually connected, but maybe it's a nice way to close, because I see Ines is coming in. It makes me think of this sentence of Selm. I forgot her their not last name now. Say again?
Selm Wenselaars?
Yes, yeah. I saw them in a talk show the other day, and I think they closed off by saying, I don't think I have an obsession with gender at all. I think the world has. So maybe you are not becoming more obsessed with gender at all. It's just that by becoming wrong or becoming ambiguous, it's the world who becomes more and more obsessed with defending those the categories that they hold so firmly. Yeah.
I think the formal question that I get to then with the object, right? I'm starting to understand why it's like in relationship to the object, is that should you then describe the object? In this case, I'm literally talking about your film, right? Should you describe the object as abstract? Or should you pass the object around as a hot potato and call out queer all the time? So by which I mean like we fight for abstraction as a response to like this over representation formally of queerness, which makes it other people, or should we just start calling everything queer and not like try to search for queer or trans in the object, but project it onto it all the time so that we become more aware of how we might be wrong in constantly projecting onto the object?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, and I think that's a great climax there. Yeah, I would really love to hear if there's others in the audience that would like to share some thoughts too, or ask questions, or maybe say something about the film or something about anything that we just touched upon. Please feel welcome to show your face if you want to, or just open your mic. How are you doing, Inez?
It has been a really nice ride listening to you. And as I said in the beginning, I knew this was going to be a little bit privileged to be part of this conversation and listen in. And it also, really sparked a lot of thoughts about how, we push things into static words or solid objects, and how can we rethink that into a more like fluid way. And I really liked how that idea of the soul got connected into this maybe constant state of transitioning, that gives us freedom to think differently about status quo or assumptions that we inherit from the culture or from the previous people that used certain words. So that could give us some freedom. And I think actually that comes down to a very basic function of art in society. I think that's why it's very important to have art institutions or places where art can exist, because I think that's exactly like thinking outside of these categories, why it's so important. And that's why there is not that much language also. But that's, I think, also very basic thing that you have been discussing so much is the sound, because that's exactly where you break free, outside of social constructs. You feel, and that's what that music does. And I like that also where you say like you go to a certain way that the music works, but then you also move away from it. And that's something that we all experience during your workshops, where you collate something into something that could look like food, but then as it starts to look like something, you move away from it. Or in the other one where we use the sex toys but not sex toys, so we collate something into something that could be a pleasure object, but then we also moved away from it. And it comes back in a lot of your practice, Sijben, and I really like this ideas that Simon also yeah, added to it. So I really enjoyed it, and I'm really more curious about questions from the public. So I would really like to invite you all, to raise your hands, and we will give you the mic.
We only have 10 minutes, so the
We
moment
only
is
have
now.
10 minutes. That's
Don't wait for others.
but maybe.
Yes, Carmo, I see you there. Yes.
Great.
Hey,
Hey, Carmo.
first of all, I want to congratulate you and to give a huge kiss to both of you, to send my love to both of you. Um, Thank you for telling me that this was happening, and thank you for the film. I was thinking when both of you proposed the idea that combines it, the ideas that combines in this idea of this object representing queerness. One of the things that stood up with me in the movie was that this was an entity, an object, this was a concept being cared by a group of people, and where a group of people would be around it. And I think that sometimes in our community, this is the way we will operate identities. It's something that's in the middle of us, and that we take care of it, and that we learn different ways of using it or of transporting it. And I found it pretty curious both of you were proposing this. And yeah, and it is something that when it's every time that's more in the center of a community, it also becomes more infectious. It also becomes more present. It also becomes more. So I was just thinking about it, and about when you both told that, it came to my idea, this
That's so
this
great.
moment in the movie.
Yeah.
Mm.
First of all, I'm just so happy to hear your voice. Carmo and I got to know each other when I lived in Lisbon, and they're very dear to me. Uh, I really like this image that you gave me of, now that you've now projected in my head, of them all carrying a concept together, that they're all like holding a concept together, holding something, that a value almost, or something that's dear to them, and then by holding it together, yeah, I think that's a beautiful image. Yeah.
I want to second also the love for Carmo. We tried also recently in Lisbon, and that was really wonderful. There's something that I think it's still about this question when you're mentioning this, Carmo. There's something about perspective still. So maybe I'm thinking again from my paranoid perspective. So maybe I'm thinking a lot about strategies, right? Because on the one hand, I'm like, okay, yes. So if the concept of queerness, to sort of draw that metaphor further, lives like between people, then the camera, right? And that's fine. Like the slipperiness, like, the object at some points becomes a little bit like a soap slipping out of the hand. But at other moments, there's like the cleavages of the object are being fingered. And then it's being swung around, etc. Like that feels totally great and fine for me, like within, like when the object is indeed surrounded. But then the camera, in some sense, right? And the idea of it becoming a film that can be shown elsewhere brings me back to
Who is
you.
looking?
Yes, exactly. Who's looking? And then like bringing the object to the airport and saying to the customs, right? Saying like, oh, it's art. And this brings me to like, okay, my friend, I have this very dear Tori, like a friend called Tori, and she was saying, she's a trans woman, and she went through the scanner, right? And it went off. And she was like, oh, honey, don't worry. I'm a trans woman, and that is a penis. You don't need to pat me down. So the explicitness in that moment might become a form of abstraction, might become putting like a soap in their hand that you know, constantly leaves the hand. It doesn't look like that because it's super explicit. And it's basically coming out, right? It's basically saying this is representation. I am a trans woman and that is a penis. But it might actually become abstraction in a moment like that, because then you're passing through customs. So maybe sometimes saying, oh, this object is an artwork. Like, I'm just thinking about like what are the moments of abstraction and what are the moments of representation, and when does representation become a form of abstraction, and how does that have to do with viewers, and how does that have to do with knowing your audience and therefore choosing strategies, if that makes sense. So that the object does not have to become, again, I might be wrong. The object does not have to become this one thing. Nor does it have to be the same. It should not be the same for everybody.
Yeah. Like a concept, right?
Super nice. I really wonder if there's another person that maybe want to ask a last question, because we have 5 minutes left.
Thanks, Carmel.
Thank you. Because otherwise I might use this time, if that's okay, to also talk about where the object is now, or maybe Sijben, maybe you can tell that actually. That's
Yes.
because this project isn't over.
True. I mean, is it ever? But right now, the film and the object are actually on show in Vienna, in a gallery called Martin Janda. I don't know how you say this in. I don't know how to pronounce this exactly. So yeah, if you happen to be there, go see it. We're also thinking about I'm still working on finding places to show the work in Lisbon or in Portugal, to kind of bring it back to its origins and give everybody who lives there, who was part of the project, a chance to see it. Yeah, and maybe I'll take this moment to plug that there was also a podcast made about my residency at Hotel Maria Kapel, which can be found on Spotify and many other platforms, and it's simply called A Little Bit Like the Soul. It's made by Jinsk, and I think it's worth your time. And also to plug that in the first weekend of December, 8, 9, and 10 of December, there will be an opening of a new work that I'm working on right now at Melly, Kunstinstituut Melly in Rotterdam. So come and see, please. And I thought maybe, Simon, maybe there's things that you also wanted to plug right now here.
Prepared for that. Yes, I also just want to re-plug what you're doing in Melly, because it's also, from what I understand, right, from what you mentioned in the conversation, it's also about this question of how objects live with people, and like how sentimental value travels, and whether when reproducing an object, like literally, like by copying an object, does it lose some of its aura? Like, does it lose some of its value, or does that not matter? Which I love, that question around originality, right? Not originality, sorry, origin. Like, is there such a thing as origin? Which I think really relates to this question of like, where does queerness live, right? Is it something that can be found? Or is it something that just cycles through?
That was always there, inherent somehow.
Yeah, and I think I'll plug something. I'm
Yes,
coming
please.
to y'all, and I would love to see you all.
When?
I'm coming in November, and I'm doing basically, I'm curating a film program for IDFA, the Documentary Film Festival Amsterdam, that I call Contagious and Queer. It's gonna happen November 12th, and then the week after, there's some amazing artists coming, like Shuli Chang, Layla Weaver, Geo Wykes is performing. And I think it feels like a right place to plug it here, just because I've been thinking a lot about this question of like, right, like how do you project? Like, should a film be trans or queer and queer? And what does that mean? And what would an abstract form of trans film look like? I'm not going to say more on that. I'll just keep it as a teaser. And I just want to say, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to say, Sijben, thank you so much for sharing your work with me. It was really, really wonderful to see and to engage with and to learn from. Also, like the podcast that you just mentioned, that was great, and the conversation you had with another Simon. And yeah, I kind of want to see another iteration now of the urban sound one.
I can ask my brother, I don't know.
Yeah. And I also want, I was imagining this just now. I was imagining a screening that you would do for objects instead of human audience.
Yeah.
That would be like
I mean, in a way, like the object that you see in the film has been in the cinema for the entire month of the screening. So it's been a lot of time that it has been spending with the film without anybody there. Yeah. And sometimes like people walking in and out. Yeah. But Simon, I also really want to thank you for this conversation, but also about, yeah, also for, I've been really feeding myself with a lot of your writings and a lot of podcasts in which you are featured over the past years actually, and even a theater piece, and it's been so helpful to help me to structure my thoughts, but also really nurturing, and mind expanding, if that's a word. So thanks a lot for that. There's a lot of that I think trickled down into the film as well. So yeah, it was really meaningful to me that you wanted to talk about it with me here. And I am really excited to see if we can also find out ways to continue this conversation within the project, within Melly, because I think there's a lot of subjects there again, that touch upon your recent work as well. So yeah, I would be very excited for that as well.
I want to ask a question, because some of the participants asked for the references that you have been mentioning during this conversation, and I think it's a nice connection also with Sijben, who told me that in the beginning of thinking about the film and also during making the film, a lot of references actually were writings and films or theater plays by you, Simon. So that's actually a nice round circle. And I was thinking, I'm just looking also at Rick, that we could send those references in a newsletter. So if you all subscribe, then we can share some, like a little list of references that came throughout this conversation for further reading. And yeah, I think that's a nice gift to the audience as well, if you all agree. Yeah.
We give an update on social media.
Yeah, we also give an update on social media, I just heard. Yeah, but thank you so much for joining, all of you, and keep in touch, and you will hear I get a lot of hearts from everybody. So I just bounce them to you. Yeah. Some applauses. No, really, thank you, and have a lovely like evening full of thoughts. Yeah, with that, thank you.
I'll take my day here.
Yeah, and you're the rest of
a
yeah.
day full of teaching. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Oh.
Bye, Carmel.
Bye.